A spark ignites. Commander Mira Seto stood on the bridge of the UES Valiant, her eyes fixed on the holographic display before her. The sleek lines of the Valiant, the pride of the United Earth Fleet, glowed a soft blue, a stark contrast to the angry red icons representing the unknown alien vessels menacing the Erebus colony. Status report. Mira barked, her voice tense but controlled. Lieutenant Kai Tanaka, her sensor officer, studied his console intently. The alien ships are holding position just outside the colony's defense perimeter. They're not responding to our hails. Mira frowned, a sense of unease settling in her gut. In all her years patrolling the frontiers of human space, she'd never encountered a species that refused to communicate. Suddenly, a klaxon blared through the bridge. "Commander," Kai shouted, his face pale. "The aliens, they've opened fire on the colony." Mira's heart dropped as she watched the holographic display erupt in a swarm of crimson lances. The colony's defenses, woefully inadequate against such an onslaught, crumpled like paper under the verage. "Get me a line to the colony. Now," Mira ordered, gripping the edge of her command console until her knuckles whitened. A static-filled screen resolved into the haggard face of Governor Eliza Harding, her eyes wide with terror. "Commander Sato, thank the stars. We're under attack. They just appeared out of nowhere. Governor, you need to evacuate immediately. Get your people to the shelters and prepare for." The screen dissolved into static as a thunderous boom echoed through the bridge. Mira stumbled, catching herself against a bulkhead. "Report. They're targeting the colony's power grid," Kai said grimly. "Main reactors are going critical. Governor Harding, she's gone." Mira felt a cold fury settle over her like a shroud. These aliens, whoever they were, had just signed their own death warrant. "Sensors, I want every scrap of data you can gather on these bastards. Comms, send an emergency FTL burst to Earth Command. Attach all sensor logs." Mira paused, her next words heavy with the weight of the lives lost below. "And include this message. The Erebus colony has fallen to an unknown alien aggressor. The UES Valiant is engaging the enemy. We will not let this atrocity go unanswered." As her crew hastened to carry out her orders, Mira turned back to the holographic display. The alien ships, their hulls now ominously dark, drifted amid the shattered remnants of the colony. A lone escape pod tumbled away from the wreckage, its emergency beacon flashing weakly. Mira felt a flicker of hope amidst the horror. There were survivors. But that hope turned to ashes in her mouth as a searing lance from the nearest alien ship speared the pod, vaporizing it instantly. Mira's nails dug into her palms as she fought down a scream of rage. These monsters had slaughtered civilians, innocents. They had to pay. As if sensing her fury, the alien ships began to turn ponderously towards the Valiant. Mira straightened, her eyes hard as flint. "Bring weapon systems online. Prepare to engage the enemy." Her voice was calm, belying the storm raging within her. For Erebus. The bridge crew nodded solemnly, their faces set with grim determination. They knew the odds, knew the risks, but they also knew their duty. As the Valiant surged forward to meet the alien threat head-on, Mira thought of all the lives lost, all the futures snuffed out in an instant of merciless aggression. Among them, a young girl, barely 12 years old, the niece of her dearest friend, now nothing more than stardust and memory. Mira would avenge her. She would avenge them all. The aliens, these heartless killers, had no idea the fury they had just ignited. They would learn, to their sorrow, the true depth of human resolve. For now, a spark had been lit, a spark that would soon blaze into an inferno that would consume the stars themselves. The war had begun. Gathering the fleet, the halls of the United Earth Defense Command echoed with the thunderous argue of 100 raised voices. In the center of the cavernous chamber, Commander Mira Seto stood tall and unyielding, a calm eye in the heart of the storm. This unprovoked attack cannot go unanswered. Admiral Toshi Nakamura slammed his fist down on the podium, his weathered face twisted with anger. The Erebus colony was a peaceful settlement, no threat to anyone. Yet these crocs slaughtered them without mercy. "And what would you have us do, Admiral?" Ambassador Elena Morales retorted, her voice sharp. "Rush headlong into a war with an enemy we know nothing about. We must seek a diplomatic solution, attempt to understand their motivations." "Their motivations?" Mira cut in, her voice cold as the void. "I'll tell you their motivations, Ambassador. Greed, cruelty, a lust for destruction and dominance." She tapped a command on her wrist computer, and the holographic display at the center of the chamber flickered to life. The assembled leaders and diplomats fell silent as the ghostly images played out before them. The merciless bombardment of the Erebus colony, the vaporization of the escape pod. They butchered civilians, children. Mira's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of a neutron star. They have no interest in diplomacy, no concept of mercy. She stepped forward, her gaze sweeping over the assembled faces. "The crocs have shown us what they are. Now we must show them what we are. We are not prey, huddling and helpless. We are humanity. We do not cower. We do not yield." Mira raised her chin, a glint of steel in her eyes. "Give me a fleet. Give me the means to fight, and I will take this war to the Crocs' own doorstep. I will make them rue the day they ever dared to spill human blood." For a long, tense moment, the chamber was silent. Then, slowly, Admiral Nakamura began to clap. One by one, the other military leaders joined in, until the room rang with a thunderous applause. Ambassador Morales shook her head, but there was a glimmer of respect in her eyes. "Very well, Commander Sato. You shall have your fleet, but know that you carry the hopes and fury of all humanity with you." Mira nodded solemnly. "I understand, Ambassador. I will not let our people down." As the meeting adjourned and the leaders dispersed to begin the grim work of war, Mira allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought of the little girl on Erebus, of the life snuffed out before it had truly begun. "I will avenge you," she whispered, a silent promise to the stars. "I will make them pay." In the days and weeks that followed, the United Earth Defense Force mobilized like never before. Ships were recalled from far-flung patrols, weapons factories worked overtime to churn out the tools of war, and recruitment centers overflowed with volunteers eager to strike back against the alien threat. At the heart of this frenzy of activity was the Valiant, undergoing a rapid refit to transform it from a patrol cruiser to a flagship of war. Its hull was reinforced with the latest ablative armor, its weapon systems upgraded with the most devastating ordnance humanity had ever devised. Mira oversaw every step of the process, driving her crew to the brink of exhaustion and beyond. They didn't complain. They understood the stakes, felt the same burning desire for justice that consumed their commander. As the Valiant emerged from the shipyards, gleaming and deadly, Mira felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The Crocs had started this war, but by all the stars in the galaxy, humanity would finish it. Standing on the bridge of her reborn ship, Mira faced her assembled crew. They looked back at her, faces set with determination, eyes alight with the fire of righteous fury. "We have been bloodied," Mira said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "We have been hurt, but we are not broken. We are humanity, and we will fight until our last breath." She raised a clenched fist, and her crew echoed the gesture. "For Erebus, for Earth, for every human life lost to the Crocs' cruelty. We will make them pay. We will make them remember the name of our species and tremble." As one, the crew of the Valiant roared their approval, their voices merging into a single defiant cry. They were ready, ready to face the unknown, to charge into the jaws of hell itself. For they were human, and they would not go quietly into the night. They would rage, they would fight, they would blaze a trail of righteous vengeance across the stars themselves. The Crocs had sown the wind. Now they would reap the whirlwind. into the breach. The UES Valiant hung in the void like a coiled serpent, its hull gleaming with the dull sheen of freshly applied ablative armor. Around it, the ships of the hastily assembled Earth fleet maintained formation, a phalanx of defiance against the encroaching darkness. On the bridge of the Valiant, Commander Mirasetto stood tall and resolute, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Crocs ships were out there, lurking just beyond visual range, their intentions as opaque and malevolent as the void itself. "Anything on sensors, Lieutenant Tanaka?" Mira asked, her voice tight. "Negative, Commander," Kai replied, his brow furrowed in concentration. "They're running silent, but they're out there. I can feel it." Mira nodded, sharing his unease. The Crocs had proven themselves to be cunning and ruthless adversaries, striking without warning or mercy. But now, the hunters would become the hunted. Suddenly, the tactical display lit up like a supernova. "Multiple contacts, bearing 035. Kai shouted, his voice edged with adrenaline. "They're charging weapons. All ships, battle stations." Mira barked, adrenaline surging through her veins. "Bring the fleet to bear. Full spread formation. Ready all weapon systems." The bridge of the Valiant dissolved into controlled chaos as the crew rushed to carry out her orders. The ship hummed with barely restrained power as its weapon systems came online, the thrum of its engines rising to a fever pitch. On the view screen, the Croc ships emerged from the void like demons from the pit, their hulls bristling with vicious spines and pulsing with malevolent energy. They opened fire without preamble, lances of searing light stabbing out at the Earth fleet. The Valiant shuddered as a beam grazed its shields, the deck bucking beneath Mira's feet. "Evasive maneuvers," she shouted, gripping the command console for support. "Return fire, all batteries." The Earth fleet responded with a fury, missiles and energy beams lashing out at the Croc ships. The void lit up with the fury of their exchange. The hulls of both fleets soon scorched and pitted by the relentless onslaught. But for all their courage and determination, the humans were outmatched. The Croc ships were larger, faster, their weapons more advanced. One by one, the Earth ships began to fall, consumed by the ravening energies of the Croc's onslaught. "We're losing ground," Kai warned, his face bathed in the angry red light of warning indicators. "Shields at 30% and falling fast." Mira gritted her teeth, her mind racing. They couldn't match the Croc ship for ship. They needed to change the rules of engagement. "Helm, bring us about," she ordered, a plan forming in her mind. "Set course for the nearest Croc's dreadnought. Ready the boarding pods and prepare for close-quarters combat." Her crew stared at her, shock and fear warring on their faces. To willingly board a Croc ship was tantamount to suicide. But in Mira's eyes, they saw something else, the glint of a desperate, audacious plan. "We can't beat them at their own game," Mira said, her voice steady. "So we'll take the fight to them, hit them where they least expect it. We'll show them what humans are made of." Slowly, understanding dawned on their faces. They nodded, grim determination settling over them like a mantle. They were the crew of the Valiant, the best Earth had to offer. They would not fail. As the Valiant surged towards the Croc's dreadnought, its hull shuddering under the constant barrage of enemy fire, Mira felt a strange calm settle over her. This was it, the moment of truth. One way or another, the course of the war would be decided here, in the crucible of battle. She thought of Lena, of the countless lives snuffed out by Croc's aggression. She thought of Earth, of the billions depending on her to hold the line. She would not let them down. She would not fail, for she was human, and she carried the hopes and fury of her entire species with her into the breach. The Valiant closed with the dreadnought, its boarding pods launching like a swarm of angry hornets. As Mira stepped into her own pod, the faces of her crew etched with grim resolve. She knew that whatever happened next, they would face it together. For they were the last line of defense, the thin gray line standing between humanity and the abyss, and they would hold that line, whatever the cost. The pod doors slammed shut, and Mira was plunged into darkness. The war had entered a new phase, and she was ready to meet it head-on. For Earth, for humanity, for victory. Turning the tide. The Valiant limped through the void, its hull scared and pitted, its crew exhausted but resolute. In the wake of the brutal engagement with the Crocs fleet, Commander Mira Sato found herself in a constant state of motion, overseeing repairs, coordinating with the other ships, planning their next move. In the quiet moments, when the weight of command seemed almost too much to bear, she found herself drawn to the observation deck. There, among the stars, she could almost imagine a universe at peace, free from the specter of war. But peace was a distant dream now. The Crocs had shown their true colors, and they would not rest until humanity was broken and subjugated. Mira's thoughts were interrupted by the hiss of the door. She turned to see Jack Hawkins, her tactical officer and trusted friend, stepping onto the deck. "You should be resting," Jack said, his brow furrowed with concern. "We need you sharp, Mira. The crew needs you." Mira sighed, rubbing her temples. "I'll rest when this is over, Jack. We're balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move." She trailed off, the implication clear. The Valiant's daring gambit had bought them time, but at a heavy cost. The ship was badly damaged, its supplies running low. They needed a miracle. And then, as if in answer to an unspoken prayer, the miracle came. "Commander," the voice of Kai Tanaka, the Valiant's sensor officer, crackled over the comm. "We're picking up a distress signal. It's from a Croc ship." Mira and Jack exchanged a glance, a flicker of hope kindling in their chests. A Croc ship, calling for help. It was almost too good to be true. But as they listened to the message, their hope turned to grim determination. The distress call was from a Crocs rebel, one who had turned against the brutality of his own kind, and he was offering them the key to victory. "The Crocs have a secret base," the rebel said, his voice ragged with pain and desperation. "A shipyard where they build their most powerful warships. If you strike there, you can cripple their war effort." Mira leaned forward, her heart pounding. This was it, the chance they'd been waiting for. "Send a message to the fleet," she said, her voice steady. "We move on the Croc shipyard. This ends now." The journey to the shipyard was tense and silent, the weight of the coming battle hanging over the fleet like a shroud. As they approached the coordinates given by the Crocs rebel, Mira could feel the anticipation building, the yearning for revenge, for justice. And then they saw it. A massive structure, hanging in the void like a malevolent spider. Croc ships swarmed around it like angry wasps, guarding their precious secret. But the element of surprise was on the side of the humans. They struck like lightning, their weapons tearing through the unsuspecting Crocs' defenses. The shipyard's shields flickered and died under the onslaught, exposing its vulnerable innards. Mira led the charge, the Valiant diving into the fray with reckless abandon. They weaved through the Crocs' fire, their own weapons blazing, cutting a path of destruction towards the heart of the shipyard. But the Crocs were not beaten yet. As the humans pressed their attack, a massive warship detached from the shipyard, its hull bristling with weapons. It was a dreadnought, one of the most feared ships in the Crocs' arsenal. And at its helm was a figure Mira had hoped never to see again. Warlord Kargas, the butcher of Arcadia Colony. The monster who had murdered Lena in cold blood. Kargas's face appeared on the view screen, twisted in a sneer of hatred and rage. "You dare attack us here, in the heart of our power. You will pay for this insolence, human. You and all your kind." Mira felt a cold fury settle over her, a calm certainty that this was the moment she had been born for. This was her chance for vengeance, for justice. For Lena. "All ships, concentrate fire on that dreadnought," she said, her voice like iron. "Tear it apart." The battle that followed was like nothing any of them had ever experienced. The dreadnought was a beast, its shields shrugging off the human weapons like raindrops. It returned fire with a ferocity that made the earlier battles seem like child's play, tearing through the human fleet with horrifying ease. Ships died, consumed in balls of plasma and debris. The screams of the dying filled the comm channels, a symphony of agony and despair. But Mira would not yield. She would not let Kargas win, not again. With a cry of defiance, she hurled the Valiant straight at the dreadnought, a suicidal charge that caught the Crocs off guard. The two ships collided in a cataclysm of twisting metal and exploding consoles. The Valiant, smaller and more agile, managed to slide past the dreadnought's shields, its hull grinding against the larger ship's armor. And in that moment, Mira saw her chance. "Boarding teams, go," she shouted, even as the Valiant shuddered and groaned around her. "Take that ship, no matter the cost." What followed was a desperate, brutal struggle, as human Marines clashed with Crocs warriors in the tight confines of the dreadnought's corridors. It was a fight without mercy, without quarter, each side driven by a primal fury. But the humans had something the Crocs did not. They had the courage of the desperate, the strength of those who fought not for glory or power, but for the very right to exist. And in the end, that made all the difference. Mira found Kargas on the dreadnought's bridge, the warlord surrounded by the bodies of his fallen guards. He snarled at her, his eyes burning with hate, but there was fear there too, fear of this human who had dared to defy him. "It's over, Kargas," Mira said, her voice cold as the void. "Your shipyard is in ruins. Your fleet scattered. You've lost." Kargas lunged at her, his claws extended, but Mira was ready. She sidestepped, her plasma rifle coming up in a smooth arc. The shot took Kargas in the chest, burning through his armor like paper. The warlord fell, his eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Mira stood over him, her face a mask of grim satisfaction. "For Lena," she said softly. "For all of them." And with that, it was over. The dreadnought, the symbol of Croc's might, was in human hands. The shipyard, the heart of their war machine, was a shattered ruin. The tide had turned. Humanity had struck back, and the Crocs had learned the price of their aggression. But as Mira stood on the bridge of the conquered dreadnought, surrounded by the cheers of her victorious crew, she knew that this was only the beginning. The Crocs would not forget this humiliation. They would return with all the fury of the wounded beast, and humanity would be ready. They had tasted victory now, and they would not rest until the Crocs' threat was ended, once and for all. The war continued, but now it was a war of hope, of determination, a human war. And they would win it, whatever the cost. Last edited 21 minutes ago. The Crucible of Kardash. The UES Valiant burst out of null space, its hull still scared from the brutal boarding action that had secured its greatest prize, a captured Croc's dreadnought, its systems slave to the human ship's controls. On the bridge, Commander Mira stood tall and resolute, her eyes fixed on the view screen. Before them hung the looming shape of Kardash, the Croc's stronghold that served as both shipyard and command center for their war effort. "Scans indicate heavy defenses, Commander," Lieutenant Tanaka reported, his voice tense. "Orbital weapon platforms, minefields, and at least 3 Crocs battle groups in defensive formation." Mira nodded, her expression grim. She had expected as much. Kardash was the key to the Crocs' war machine, the nerve center of their military might. It would not fall easily. "Signal the fleet," she ordered, her voice ringing with authority. "All ships, assume attack formation. Prepare to engage on my mark." Behind the Valiant, the ragtag remnants of the Earth fleet moved into position, their hulls pitted and scarred from countless battles. They were battered, but not broken. Not while a single human heart still beat. Beside Mira, Zokath, the renegade Croc scientist who had made their victory at the dreadnought possible, stirred uneasily. "They know we're coming," he hissed, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "They'll be ready for us." Mira met his gaze, a grim smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Then we'll just have to be ready for them." She turned back to the view screen, her eyes hardening. All ships, engage. And with that, the battle for Karadesh began. The Earth fleet surged forward, weapons blazing, as the Crocs' defenses opened up with a thunderous barrage. Space itself seemed to shudder under the onslaught, the void lighting up with the fury of the exchange. The Valiant shook as a plasma torpedo detonated off its starboard bow, its shields flaring bright under the impact. On the bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, crew members crying out as the deck bucked beneath their feet. Shields at 60%. Tanaka shouted over the din. "We can't take much more of this." But Mira's focus was on the captured dreadnought, her hands flying over the control interface. Under her command, the massive ship lumbered forward, its devastating arsenal roaring to life. A lance of searing energy burst from the dreadnought's main cannon, slamming into the nearest Croc's battle cruiser with cataclysmic force. The alien ship simply vaporized, reduced to a cloud of expanding plasma in an instant. A cheer went up from the human fleet as the Croc's line wavered, thrown into disarray by the sudden destruction of one of their own. Mira pressed the advantage, ordering a full broadside from the dreadnought, even as the Valiant and its companions poured fire into the breach. But the Crocs recovered quickly, their discipline and battle-hardened instincts kicking in. They reformed their lines, concentrating their fire on the captured dreadnought. If they could take it out, the human fleet would be critically vulnerable. On the Valiant's bridge, alarms blared as the dreadnought's shields began to buckle under the Croc's onslaught. Zolkev hissed in frustration, his claws digging into the console. "We're losing the dreadnought," he snarled. "Its systems are too badly damaged to withstand this firepower." Mira's jaw clenched, her mind racing. The dreadnought was their ace in the hole, their one chance to even the odds. She couldn't let it fall, not now. Suddenly, an idea formed in her mind. It was desperate, perhaps even suicidal. But it might just work. "Lieutenant Tanaka, can we remote pilot the dreadnought from here?" Tanaka blinked, taken aback. Yes, Commander, I believe so. But without a crew." "We don't need a crew." Mira cut in, her voice hard. "We just need it to keep fighting for a few more minutes, long enough to turn the tide." Understanding dawned in Tanaka's eyes. He nodded grimly and set to work, his fingers flying over his console. In moments, the dreadnought's control systems were slave to the Valiant, its failing shields and dwindling weapons now under Mira's direct command. On the view screen, the tide of battle was turning. The Crocs, sensing victory, were pressing their attack, their ships moving in for the kill. They didn't realize the trap that was about to spring. With a flick of her wrist, Mira sent the dreadnought surging forward, straight into the heart of the Croc's formation. Its shields were gone, its hull breached in a dozen places, but it still had its engines, and its reactor. "All ships, fall back." Mira ordered over the fleet comm. "Get clear of the dreadnought now." As the Earth fleet disengaged, pulling in back from the looming ship, Mira input a final command into the dreadnought's failing systems. Its reactor, already strained to the breaking point, began to overload, a runaway cascade that could not be stopped. The Crocs, realizing too late what was happening, tried to scatter. But it was already too late. The dreadnought, now a multi-megaton bomb, detonated in a blinding flash of light and fury. The explosion ripped through the Croc's fleet like a tidal wave, shattering ships and vaporizing Kardash's orbital defenses. The Croc's command center, caught at the epicenter of the blast, simply ceased to exist, reduced to a cloud of molten debris in an instant. In the sudden, stunning silence that followed, Mira slumped back in her chair, her heart pounding. They had done it. Against all odds, they had struck a blow at the very heart of the Croc's war effort. But as the cheers of her bridge crew washed over her, as the reports of the Crocs' shattering defeat flooded in, Mira felt a sudden chill. For she knew that this was not the end. It was only the beginning. The Crocs would retaliate. They would come for Earth with all the fury of a wounded beast, and when they did, humanity would need to be ready. The crucible of Karadesh had been a victory, but the war was far from over. And Mira knew, with a grim certainty, that the greatest trials were yet to come.